Naming a Kitten with Chloë of the Midnight Storytellers. Once upon a time, in the old days of China, there was a philosopher. A philosopher is someone who thinks a lot. He or she thinks about everything that happens in the world. You can be a philosopher working in a kitchen, or walking to school, or digging the garden. The man in this story was both wise and clever. They're not always the same thing. This man was so clever that he got himself a job as philosopher to the Emperor of China. He had a comfortable little house. He had enough money for good food, clothes he liked, and a servant. He could invite his friends round to drink tea with him whenever he wanted. The philosopher's best friends were the firework maker and the paper maker from the emperor's palace, and a farmer who lived along the valley. The philosopher was even friends with the imperial chief tax collector, who was a scary person to know, but who was secretly kind and generous. All of them liked to sit comfortably together in the philosopher's pretty little house and drink tea and talk. When the philosopher had to visit the emperor, he sometimes told him the stories he'd heard from his friends, tales from far away and long ago, or gossip about people in the villages and valleys. The emperor liked those stories best. The emperor was not allowed to speak to ordinary people in case someone was rude to him by accident and he had to order them to have their heads chopped off. The emperor was often lonely. The philosopher was never lonely. His friends visited often and sometimes brought him small presents. The chief tax collector brought beautiful poems written on scrolls that he'd made up all by himself. The paper maker brought him blank notebooks in which the philosopher could write all his ideas and make up his own poems. Sometimes the notebooks were bound in soft leather, sometimes in thick silk, and sometimes the notebooks had marbled end papers with swooping swirls of colour. The farmer brought delicious presents, such as eggs, sometimes a big shiny fish, or sometimes a pheasant to roast for supper. And some people said the farmer poached the fish from the emperor's ponds and the pheasant from the emperor's park. But if this were true, he didn't take many, and they tasted good anyway. Every year, the firework maker brought the philosopher a box of his best fireworks. One day, the farmer brought his friend a very special present. It was a kitten. The philosopher reached out to stroke the kitten, and it opened its small pink mouth and hissed at him. The kitten had lots of sharp little teeth. The philosopher, being wise and clever, folded his hands into his sleeves and bowed to the kitten with a smile. "I apologize," said the philosopher gently. "You are a small cat in a place you do not know, which is very frightening. I am, by comparison, a very large person with equally large friends, and this too is frightening for you. Let's all sit down." The philosopher's friends made themselves comfortable. "And like every cat in the world, you will come and talk to us in your own time." The paper maker said, "What are you going to call him?" "Cats must have the right name," smiled the philosopher. "Otherwise neither they nor their owners will be happy." The kitten started to pad about. It sniffed at the furniture and at the hems of their robes and at their slippers. It sniffed the soft rug and sneezed. Its small furry sides were breathing in and out quickly because it was still scared. When the chief tax collector lifted his cup of tea to drink, the kitten sprang sideways in fright, with all its claws stuck out and all its fur and tiny tail fluffed up. The chief tax collector's hand shook as he stopped himself from laughing out loud, and then he drank his tea. "That is most considerate of you," said the philosopher. "Cats cannot bear to be laughed at. This kitten is being so brave and fierce, I think I shall call him Tiger." "That's a good name," said the firework maker, "but it's not as fierce or strong as Dragon. You should call him Dragon." "That's a fine name," said the paper maker. "But even dragons have trouble flying as high as clouds. Clouds are usually far above dragons. This is clearly a most superior kitten. You should call him Cloud." The chief tax collector dabbed a splash of tea from his chin with a napkin and said, "That is a charming name, but clouds just float about. A breeze pushes them around. A strong wind can blow clouds away altogether. You should call your cat Wind." The kitten lifted its tail. The philosopher flapped his sleeve in front of his face to waft away the smell. "I think that name might cause trouble," he said with a smile. "Besides, where is the power of wind? When it meets a wall. Brick or stone, a good wall can stand up to a very strong wind. I think I should call my cat Wall." That can't be right," said the paper maker, slurping tea. "It's true that a good wall can stand up to wind, but even a tiny mouse can nibble a hole in a wall. A mouse can burrow right through a wall. You should call your cat Mouse." "Don't be daft," said the farmer, putting down his bowl and chopsticks. He held out his hand to the kitten, who recognized his smell and allowed itself to be picked up and perched on the farmer's knee. It started to make very small purrs as the farmer's thick fingers gently stroked it. The farmer grinned, showing all the gaps in his teeth. "You can't call a cat Mouse." "Why not?" said everyone else. Just at that moment, a small brown mouse came scurrying across the floor, sniffing around the table for crumbs. The kitten, standing on the farmer's knee, saw the mouse, crouched down, lashed its little tail from side to side, and pounced. There was a squeak, and that was the end of the mouse. "Oh dear," said the philosopher, gazing proudly at his kitten as it marched across the rug, carrying the dead mouse in its jaws. "I quite see that it would not do to call a cat Mouse. I shall have to think of another name." The kitten dropped the mouse in front of the philosopher and looked up at him as if it were expecting the philosopher to say thank you. "What a puzzle you are," smiled the philosopher. Gently he reached down and the kitten jumped onto his big sleeve and clawed its way up. Surprised but pleased, the philosopher sat up slowly. The kitten walked up his arm to sit on his shoulder. The kitten sniffed at the philosopher's ear. Then it started to lick its white front paw and washed its face. "He likes you," grinned the farmer. "It's a wonderful present," said the philosopher, whose cheek was being tickled by kitten whiskers. He managed to keep still. "Beautiful. Thank you very much." "But you still haven't found a name for it," observed the imperial chief tax collector. "Well, it's not for want of trying," said the philosopher. For the first time, he stroked his kitten and heard it purr. He smiled broadly. Let's all have another cup of tea and think about this." The philosopher and his friends drank tea and played with the kitten all afternoon. So, what do you think they called that kitten?